everyone, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. In a shocking development, Bashar al-Assad's regime has fallen after 13 years of civil war in Syria. Rebel forces have taken control of Damascus, forcing Assad to flee to Russia. This marks a major turning point for Syria and the region. With Assad gone, what's next for the country? Can the rebels bring stability, or will new conflicts emerge? More details in my program now. Joining me from the United States of America is Eugene Chausovsky, Senior Director at New Lines Institute. And joining from Turkey is Hamdullah Baycar, Assistant Professor, Karadeniz Technical University. Dear experts, warm welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Eugene, my first question to you. How does the fall of Assad align with U.S. objectives in Syria and the broader Middle East? What should Washington prioritize in a post-Assad scenario?
Right. Well, I think it's worth mentioning, first of all, that the situation is very fast-moving, and we'll have to see what the government of Syria actually shapes up to be after the fall of Assad. But this is clearly in the interests of the U.S. in terms of its strategic objectives, primarily because the Assad government was strongly allied with two principal adversaries of the U.S., and that includes Russia and Iran. So we've seen now how Russia's military bases and its operations there are now significantly under threat, with Assad having fled to Moscow, and then Iran using Syria as a conduit for sending weapons to groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon. So stabilizing the Syrian country, providing a more kind of stable situation for the Syrian people is definitely of interest for the U.S. But from a foreign policy standpoint, it's ensuring that whatever new government emerges doesn't align itself with countries like Russia or Iran.
Well, Hamdullah, how does the fall of Bashar al-Assad and the rise of a new rebel coalition affect Turkey's regional influence, especially in light of Iran's weakened position and Russia's preoccupation elsewhere?
I think Turkey would consider this much more complicated than the U.S., partly because Turkey shares like long, 900 kilometers land borders with Turkey, and hosts around 2 to 4 million Syrians in Turkey. So while, of course, Turkey welcomed the fall of Bashar al-Assad, what comes next is more important for Turkey, as it can cause it can bring dreams, or it can bring a nightmare. So in that sense, I think I would agree with Yuan in seeing the internal dynamics of Syria.
United States of America and Turkey are ready to work together to bring more stability to Syria. The next question to both of you, how do you see this future cooperation between Washington and Ankara in regards to what's happening in Syria?
I think just from from the perspective of high-level shared interests, certainly both, I would argue that both the U.S. and Turkey are interested to avoid the emergence of any groups like the IS or groups that could create further destabilization both within Syria and beyond its borders. Obviously, beyond that, there's a lot of differences between the U.S. and Turkey in terms of specific groups that they're willing to support. But ultimately, I think that there is a shared interest in a stable Syria, a Syria that does not align itself, as the Assad government had, with countries like Iran and Russia, and the rest is going to be kind of on the tactical element. Obviously, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has already weighed in, saying that Syria is not the U.S., it's not the conflict for the U.S. to be involved. In fact, the U.S. was already planning to kind of disengage from the country even before what we've seen, and I think that's going to be even more the case now moving forward.
That's very interesting, especially when Donald Trump will take his place in the White House. He's not the person who supports a full U.S. engagement in Syria. Therefore, Turkey will have to take more its presence in Syria to use its power and help to stabilize the domestic situation there. How exactly it may happen in coordination with Washington and other interested powers, superpowers? Hamdullah, please.
Yes, I think first of all, Turkey might wait a bit, at least publicly, openly, might wait Donald Trump term, partly because Biden administration mostly wanted to isolate Turkey. So for the last 2-3 weeks, is this changeable? I don't think so. So, and partly because if you take the first term of Trump as a reference, Trump is more close to Turkey's side in using the American military in Syria. So if we go back to 2019, Trump decided to withdraw the U.S. army after a phone call with Erdogan. Of course, this did not happen. They just downgraded their existence because of the U.S. domestic concerns about some groups that U.S. supports, but Turkey considers them as a national security. I think a national security threat. I think this will be the main disagreements between Turkey and U.S. While U.S. is happy to give a federal-like situation or an autonomy region to YPG, Turkey is considering YPG or any other organization that they will dominate as a national threat. Indeed, like they don't welcome the federal status at all. While US, Russia are already familiar with the federal status as they own one, Turkey considers the federalism even in neighboring states as a threat that can be contingent.
Eugene,
so I think in the coming terms, while Trump might be in a better lines than Biden in Syrian affairs, YPG will remain as a significant challenge for bilateral US-Turkey relations.
Eugene, that's a very good point, actually. Rebel forces, how exactly is Washington planning to be involved in any kind of negotiations and the future recognition of a new power to take place in Syria, taking into account that within the last year it was more about Russia, Iran, and Turkey who was trying to unite the efforts to deal with the crisis in Syria?
Well, I think that the overall U.S. interest, especially that of incoming President Donald Trump, is to basically wind down these long-standing conflicts. Obviously, Syria had been going on for more than a decade, although it was quite dormant up until very recently. But I'm also including the conflicts in Gaza, the conflict in Lebanon, which we've recently had a ceasefire, which is tenuously holding at this point. But clearly, the U.S. wants to remove itself to the extent possible from these active military conflicts and rely on local and regional players, whether that be obviously Israel in the case of Lebanon and Gaza, but also Turkey to a certain extent, and other actors perhaps throughout the region in Syria as well. So essentially, it's trying to create a situation that's more stable so that it can focus on larger and kind of more long-term threats, in particular China, and to a lesser extent Russia.
Talking more about the position of Israel, Israel has said it has carried out airstrikes on strategic weapon systems inside Syria, and that ground troop operations on Syria territory were a limited temporary step. Eugene, one more question to you. What specific threats prompt Israel to target strategic weapon system in Syria, and what reaction should we expect from the United States?
I think that this is probably being done to a certain extent in coordination with the U.S. in terms of what Israel is doing. Primarily, I see these sending its troops to the Golan Heights. The airstrikes. It's trying to essentially preempt any potential threat from whatever groups or whatever governing powers emerge. Obviously, right now we don't know exactly what that will be. I don't think that Israel is prepared or intent on a full kind of campaign like it's been conducting in Lebanon, in Gaza, as we've already mentioned, it's already in the process of winding those down, I think, to a big emphasis from the Trump administration. So essentially preventing any spillover of fighting, any emerging threats is what Israel is trying to do. And I think this is what the US is going to support Israel in doing moving forward.
Well, Hamdullah, much depends on how those who came to power in Syria will behave. So what are the expectations of Turkey?
The best scenario for Turkey is united opposition which have an international legitimization and also a pro-Turkic stance, or at least a stance which is not really welcome to the federal status or autonomous region. However, this doesn't mean Turkey is not aware of the realpolitik on the ground. So as far as I see, Turkey is trying to put some of the pro-Turkic rebels in the administration to have a negotiation channels when they have when they announce the government. Also, meanwhile, they are trying to push the Syrian National Army to gain as much as territory they can have, as they have more leverage on them. I think this will be the ideal scenario and the policy that they will go through.
Eugene, a bit more about the future perspectives of Washington involvement on what we see today in Syria. What strategic opportunities United States may see for itself by diminishing influence of Iran and Russia in Syria? Now I'm asking about the future expectations, not only about Syria, but also from the Middle East.
Right. Well, if we look at this kind of from a broader strategic perspective, if going especially back to the previous Trump administration, the strategy was essentially to create new diplomatic relations between partner and allied countries that the U.S. has in the Middle East. That includes Israel, but that includes a lot of important Gulf countries, including the UAE, Bahrain. Obviously, Saudi Arabia had played a very important role, although that reestablishing those diplomatic ties was upended essentially because of the conflicts in Gaza. So Trump is really going to be approaching a lot of these conflicts in an interconnected way, obviously trying to bring down the direct U.S. presence and working more closely with allies or different partner countries. What I mentioned, Israel, Gulf states, even Turkey to a certain extent, even wind down the war in that's also interconnected given Russia's role, and to focus more of its attention on the Indo-Pacific in general and China in particular. So the extent that the U.S. can disengage in a direct military way, but still maintain its diplomatic, economic influence, political influence throughout the Middle East is going to be the overall objective, I think, moving forward.
Hamdullah, what challenges or maybe opportunities that this development create for Turkey in terms of managing the millions of Syrian refugees it currently hosts?
Before that question, I would like to also respond to your question to you, Eugene, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
I think the fall of Assad proved for U.S. that Russia is not a great power anymore. If you remember, in 2014, Obama stated this in one of his statements. Russia is could invade or could threat the neighboring countries, but Russia is no longer a great power. It's not a superpower. It is a regional power. While this was a controversial, especially considering that Russian military base had a deterrent aspect for at least over a decade in Syria, there were some analysts and some scholars believing that Russia is gaining its great power status back. I think the fall of Bashar Assad showed that Russia does not have the capability of fighting in two fronts, which great power should have. And therefore, its military existence does not deter the domestic or foreign powers, and is not an enough security guarantee for the regime or the state that they have been, contrary to the U.S. military bases in most of the states. So the U.S. military bases, like all over the world, are enough deterrent for the regime or the state. It depends on is the military base there to protect the regime or is there to protect the state in total? So that was the point I wanted to make about the demolished Russian influence with the fall of Assad.
And please come back to the question about the migrants and refugees who fled Turkey since the beginning of the war in Syria. How exactly the current situation, ongoing situation in Syria, may help or actually make it more difficult for Turkey to deal with this issue?
Yes. To be honest, if you were in Turkey for the last 10, 15 days, if you went to any cafe or any place where people publicly watch TV, you will see people were watching the developments as they follow a football match or a significant national event. Partly because the crowd, there were many migrants, refugees within the crowd, and partly because the rest of the people, the Turkish public themselves consider this as a national issue. And the biggest reason in this was the existence of the refugees, as the 2, 3 million, 4 million, I don't know, we have different figures, were used a lot both by the public or by the anti-government politics to illegitimize the Turkish government policy that they have conducted since 2011. So at least for now, and not even and even before the fall of Damascus, there were starting returns of the refugees. We don't know how many in numbers, but we know that there is a trend of returning. What the Turkish experts or scholars expect is that most of the people who couldn't start a good life here will probably return, because the reconstruction of the country will provide them jobs or houses to return. And I think this is the return of the migrants could be the most important issue for both the migrants living in Turkey that they follow or the Turkish public itself. And we have heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that they are trying to conduct a good plan for a peaceful return of the migrants. Of course, this doesn't mean like the whole will return, but they have some psychological numbers that they will consider it as a success.
Eugene, before I ask my next question to both of you, I would like you to comment on what Hamdullah just said about the power of Russia, its influence. It's quite clear that Russia is not able, from the words of our expert, have two fronts to have its continued presence in Ukraine and in Syria. And most probably we will see that Turkey will have more power in Syria starting from now. Therefore, what about your expectations? Do you think that there are other powers like China, for example, and the European Union may also decide to increase its presence if it's needed for them to be involved in the issues in the Middle East?
Right. Well, I would just firstly say that I largely agree with Hamdullah in terms of his assessment of Russia's ability, or rather inability, to have multiple theaters that it's militarily active in. I will say, though, that Russia has had some advantage more recently in the primary theater that it's involved in, obviously the war in Ukraine, although I think that it's ramping up there mostly to have an advantageous position in the ceasefire negotiations that I expect to happen early next year. But we've seen, not only in Syria, but also in the Caucasus, the war in Nagorno-Karabakh as well, where Russia's military backing of particular countries did not bode well for those partners or allies. So it is, I think, to a certain extent, showing some of the weaknesses in terms of that military power projection. Now, as far as other countries, certainly China has become more involved, primarily economically, but also diplomatically in the Middle East, and I expect that trend to continue. The EU, I think, largely holds the position similar to that of the US. And there's a lot of diplomatic involvement, but I don't expect any kind of major military increases, especially directly on the ground. So working with allies, working to establish a new normal, so to speak, because we've seen not only this this rapid fall of the Assad regime, but some really significant changes over the past year, going back to Lebanon, going back to the Palestinian territories, and really throughout the Middle East. I think it's a matter of stabilization from the standpoint of the US and the EU, and China trying to fill potentially some vacuums, although I think it too will be very hesitant to get involved in a direct security sense as well.
Eugene, I may ask this question too, as according to US envoy, the weakening of Syria's government with the recent gains made by the opposition forces is going to have massive implications in neighboring Lebanon. In his opinion, Iran will find it difficult to transfer weapons to the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. What consequences might this have for Israel and conflict in Gaza?
Right. Well, I think we've already seen how Hezbollah in Lebanon has been dramatically weakened as a result of Israel's military operations, first airstrikes and then the ground campaign.
Yes, they even signed this ceasefire agreement. I mean, Israel and Lebanon.
Right, exactly. So, and I think it's not a coincidence in terms of the timing that immediately after the signing of the ceasefire agreement is when we saw these rapid advances, within Syria, and eventually the fall of the Assad regime. So, I think that Iran will stay a player. I don't think it's going to be completely absent. I mean, just given its geographic proximity, its influence through a number of different channels, not only the Assad government, but also militias throughout Iraq and Syria. And Iran itself has already said that they want to stay present and stay active no matter what the future Syrian government ends up becoming. So I think Iran's role will certainly be weakened to a large extent, but I don't imagine that it's going to be inactive completely, whether it's influencing events in Syria, in neighboring Lebanon, and throughout the Middle East overall.
Hamdullah, will be nice to know your opinion about this position of Iran in terms of what we see between Israel and Palestine in Gaza, Israel and Lebanon. If the Iranian position has been weakened and if Hezbollah will not be able to get any support from Iran coming from Syria, then how Turkey will behave in this particular situation?
The stance of Turkey in Iran and Iran-backed groups is very interesting, because while Turkey does not hide that they have a relationship with Hamas, they are not very open, not very warm with Hezbollah or with any other Iranian-backed groups. So if their influence is demolished, does this matter for Turkey? I'm really not sure about that. But for Israel, since the fall of Bashar Assad, or since the surprise attacks that has been taken since the end of November, it showed as if Bashar Assad was very powerful against Iran or against Israel, or was responding violently. That's also not true. Like the change in Syrian government, will that be a danger to Israel? I don't think, or will it help Israel at all? I don't think it will make much difference, either positively or negatively, because the reason why Israel is taking now a new territories, they take advantage of every possible scenario. Like they take lands, if they keep it with them, they keep it. If not, they use it as a bargaining during one of the negotiations that they will have. So I think the fall of Assad will not have a great impact on Israel's ability or capability in the region in general.
So it won't have any significant implications. And my last question to both of you, Eugene, you may start answering first. After 13 years of civil war in Syria, can we definitely say it has ended with the fall of Bashar al-Assad? Or are there other factors that need to be considered to declare an end to the war?
Yeah, I think at this point we can't, definitively declare the end to this war. Hopefully, this marks the end of large-scale fighting, and that there can be a coalition government that emerges that meets the interests of first and foremost the Syrian people, but also provides stability in the Middle East. But there's so many different actors that we've already talked about, both internally within Syria, but also externally, whether that be the Western countries, Russia, Iran, emerging there. I think the next phase is the most important one, which is what is going to be the government that replaces the Assad regime. We've seen in other places from Iraq throughout the Middle East that the fall of a long-standing regime or a long-standing dictatorship, while cheered by many within the country, can often lead to new forms of instability or at least uncertainty in the country. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But I think until there is that kind of stable post-Assad government, this is still going to be very much in flux.
Hamdullah, and your opinion on this matter, do you also support the claim that this is not the end of the civil war, but they are the perspectives to see it in the near future?
To be honest, it is very hard to say yes or no. However, we have different examples. We have examples from Iraq, we have examples from Libya, we have examples from Tunisia, partly from Egypt, or maybe we will have a completely different examples from Syria. So, of course, we hope that it will be the end of the civil war, but it is very fragile. The violence can erupt at any time, and it is very open to foreign intervention. Also, this is also partly this will be partly about the foreign powers, especially the regional powers and also EU and US. How much care and how much attention will they give to help the state building, nation building, institutionalizing, and this kind of things, both financially, politically, and in know-how situations. So, yeah, that will be my question. So it will be important to see how the nation building and state building will play. As Assad's rule, not only Bashar Assad but his father, has demolished any opposition so far. So there is no organized opposition that they can just take the rule, take the state and establish the state and the nation. But one good thing is they have a human capital to do so, while Afghanistan was less fortunate in that sense. There were less capable human in being able to take role in state building process, while Syria, I think, is a bit luckier than Afghanistan in that sense.
Right, of course, especially because there was less support to what happened in Afghanistan previously from the international community, rather than what we can see today in Syria. European Union, United States, and some other major powers already expressed its support to what's happened in Syria. Let's see how the situation will be developed. Dear expert, thank you so much for joining our discussion today.
Thank you so much. It was good to be with you.
Thank you. And I thank you, dear viewers, for watching Inside Politics. Stay with us and see you in the next edition.